So I'm going to focus on Texas because right now I can't really think about anything else because we're in the middle of litigating it. And so I will talk to you about Texas for a few minutes, just as an example of how some of the litigation is unfolding in this round. Part of the topic of this panel is about demographic change. So I thought I would share with you some of the very significant demographic changes that have happened in Texas. Texas grew substantially by about 4 million people. And as a result, we were the big winners in the apportionment that occurred after the 2010 census. Texas gained 4 new congressional seats. So we had lots and lots to work with. As opposed to the musical chairs where the music stops and there's fewer chairs, we had 4 more chairs. So this is very exciting for everybody. In terms of Latino growth, Latinos constituted about 65% of the growth in Texas overall in the last census. And if you look back yet another census, back to the previous round, the 1990 to 2000 round, Latinos were also about 65% of the population growth. So the way this works out, between 1990 and 2000, Anglos grew by about 640,000, Latinos grew by 2.3 million. And the growth was similar again this time. This time we gained 4 congressional seats. The last round we gained 2. But none of them had been allocated to Latinos. There were no Latino majority seats being created. And so there was a very strong feeling in the Latino community in Texas that we were not going to let another round happen where we did not pick up a Latino opportunity. The last Latino opportunity seat that was created in 1991. It's currently held by an Anglo, who was the person who was elected in the election after the creation of that seat. We also felt pretty good going into this round because we had a fairly recent Supreme Court ruling chastising Texas for violating the Voting Rights Act in its mid-decade redistricting and telling it specifically that you shouldn't be diluting Latino voting strength. So we figured this was some helpful wind in our sails. And so we started. We were off with the bang of the gun. The census district comes down to Texas in February, and off we go. The session was very tense, the regular legislative session, and not even so much about redistricting as it was about immigration. With everything that's going on with the Arizona anti-immigrant law, the litigation there, with South Carolina passing a law, Alabama passing a law, you know there were people in Texas who wanted to make this their big legislative issue. So the session itself was very acrimonious, very racially tense, filled with all kinds of incredibly inappropriate statements being made by people. Sometimes they managed to actually focus in on immigrants, but a lot of times in Texas it was just that free-floating hostility, a lot of talk about people who speak Spanish, a lot of talk about Latinos. It was all very inappropriate. And during this same time that all this is going on, the redistricting plans are being worked on and finally came out. And as it turned out, all of our great energy that we had around demographic growth, new seats, good case law was for naught because Texas cannot help itself. It's like having a disorder like kleptomania. You tell them not to touch and they have to. And that's what they did. One of the things that was really remarkable about the legislative process was that as we took the depositions afterwards, the Texas mappers admitted that they made no attempt at all to comply with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. There was no thinking about how many majority seats there ought to be in the new plan. There was some thinking about retrogression under Section 5, but consistently the mappers testified that they did not undertake an analysis to try to figure out how many more, for example, Latino majority seats ought to be included in any of these redistricting plans. In fact, Texas managed, because Texas is really good at this, they managed to subtract the number of Latino majority seats in the Texas House, which has 150 seats. So we went backwards on the Texas House despite the growth and the 65% and all of that. And with respect to congressional, there was no increase in the number of Latino opportunity districts. There was some artful renumbering, but there was no increase. So this was bad. There was also some really interesting intentional discrimination that I can't wait for the Supreme Court to hear about when they finally do take this case. Very similar to what had come out in 2003 regarding the intentional vote dilution in a big West Texas congressional district that's Latino majority. This time Texas knew, following the Supreme Court case, that they could not gut the district by taking out hundreds of thousands of Latinos like they had before. So this time they did something very, very creative. They kept the district Latino majority, but systematically swapped high turnout Latino precincts out of the district and swapped in low turnout Latino precincts so that the district, according to their analysis, could only elect the Latino preferred candidate in 1 out of 10 elections. And that's very well described in the record of the case by the Texas mappers, and something I personally salivate over in terms of taking this on appeal. So off we go to court. The plans are signed by the Texas governor in the summer, and Texas, immediately knowing that it needs to get pre-clearance because we are a Section 5 state, says, well, we're not going to go to that blankety-blank Obama Justice Department, we're going to court. And really slow-walked the litigation for pre-clearance. Now you could say that was incompetence to choose the slowest possible route towards pre-clearance and then insist on a summary judgment ruling. I personally give my opposing counsel more credit than that. I think they did it on purpose to create exactly the crisis that we're in now in Texas, where we don't have a pre-cleared plan. While Texas is going to the Washington, D.C. court, and we're intervening over there, we go to court in Texas and challenge these plans under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act and the Constitution. We have discovery. We have a 2-week trial in September. During the process of all of this, we discovered that Texas was trying to implement its pre-cleared plans by emailing and calling up all of the counties, all 254 counties, in fact, in Texas, and telling them, don't worry about the pre-clearance, just go ahead and revise your precinct boundaries. The 3-judge panel in Texas that had enjoined implementation of the unpre-cleared plans was displeased when it learned that Texas was trying to backdoor the implementation of them. By October, the time is running out, right? We have a very fast primary season in Texas. Our primary is scheduled for March 6th, 2012. And the preparation deadlines for that back up into October, and the more meaningful ones occur in November. So by October, you can tell there's some pressure here to try to get a redistricting plan. The court in Texas, realizing it may have to draw something, begins to call for a schedule and for some interim plan proposals. This is beauty contest litigation, no special master, because in Texas we don't do it that way. Our courts draw our plans. The lawyers at this point are scrambling back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Texas. So the week of Halloween, as I was describing earlier, we're in court for 12 hours on Monday in Texas on what these interim plans are going to look like. Tuesday we flew. Wednesday we argued here in Washington, D.C. in front of the 3-judge panel that was considering the pre-clearance Section 5 issue. Wednesday night we flew back. Thursday was another 12-hour day in the Texas court over the House plan, and then Friday was also in court. So we're just, it's like, I wanted to get a PowerPoint for you with like lawyers running from one place to another. Or maybe I would have brought a football and just had you throw it back and forth, but that's the way it feels. In November, the court in D.C. declines to pre-clear the Texas redistricting plans on summary judgment, saying that there are some very serious issues of contested fact with respect to whether these plans are retrogressive under Section 5, and further noting that since Texas had been proceeding under the wrong legal standard, they needed to get that fixed before we could go forward. The Texas court now realizes the ball is in its lap, and it has to draw. And draw it did. On congressional, Latinos gained 1 seat out of the 4. We should have gained 2, and the second one that we should have gained was in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Instead, the court fractured Latinos across the Metroplex. We're the plurality population in Dallas now, although most people can't really wrap their heads around that idea, and apparently the court couldn't either, because it did not draw us an opportunity district in the Metroplex where it should have. Now, of course, the state of Texas has gone to the Supreme Court, claiming there is an enormous crisis because the Texas court is implementing court-drawn plans. And Texas wants its plan adopted, and so today, in fact, I've been briefing the Supreme Court response. We'll file that at 4 today, and I just got an email that the court has called for our response on the motion for stay on the congressional plan on Monday. This is a crisis entirely of the state's making, and I want to be absolutely clear about this. There is nobody else at fault for having unpre-cleared redistricting plans than Texas. And when you have an unpre-cleared plan, a court is going to draw it for you. So we'll see how that goes. The only overarching comment that I wanted to make is that we see the same things coming up in this round as we have before. From the Latino perspective, an entrenched exclusion, historical exclusion from the political process in places like Texas and other parts of the Southwest. Strong demographic pressure, not just from immigration. I want people to understand that Latinos have a great amount of natural increase. We have lots of kids, and this is what's causing our population to grow in a way that is very strong and very permanent. I had a demographer tell me recently that Anglos in Texas stopped reproducing at replacement rates 20 years ago. So there's a big ball rolling in places like Texas and other southwestern states, combined with a very strong urge in the Latino community to get fair representation, and a similarly strong urge, I think, on the other side of those who are in power now to prevent that from happening. So we're seeing it play out again in ways that it very much has before, and I'm just really glad to be a part of it.